Okay, welcome back everybody. So today we are discussing the global water cycle. So pretty much how much water cycles through the earth and sort of the big numbers, back of the envelope, numbers that you will want to remember. So the first thing that I'd like to point out is the blue marble. So this is a picture taken in 1972 by an astronaut on the Apollo 17 mission. And this is actually an interesting history anecdote because the astronaut just snapped the picture without, that wasn't in the mission. Basically, he had the camera with him, just sort of turned around, saw the Earth, and snapped the picture. And this is really the first picture of the globe as we know it. Of course, later in the 2000s, satellites captured the Earth in much greater details, and these are the more classic blue marbles that we have come to know now. The point of these illustrations is really to see the amount of water that is, throughout the Earth. So obviously that's why it's the blue planet, because water is everywhere. But also in these pictures you can see the vapor, so the clouds basically, right? The water as vapor swirling around the Earth. So that next slide here is a close-up or a satellite view of Africa, and I chose to add this illustration again because here we can really see the relationship between the water, the different states, so the liquid water, the vapor, and also the vegetation. So if you see down here in the center of Africa, all this zone here where the clouds are abundant, you can see that underneath you can see the green of that rainforest. So this is some of the largest primary rainforests. I mean, you can think of the Amazon on the other side of the Atlantic. The story is the same, but here you can really see that relationship between the vegetation and the clouds or the vapor. And the point here is that one of the major processes, right, that cycle water is actually vegetation. We typically think of evaporation, but it's really transpiration. It's really the vegetation that is sort of putting a massive amount of water back into the atmosphere as clouds. You can also see here, out of the Sahara, some swirls of desert dust or sand. And if you remember in July of 2020, that might be a little far in the past when you watch those videos, but there were, regularly in the summer, you can see those events of dust from the Sahara crossing the Atlantic and reaching the coast of Florida, for example, and that gives like real nice sunsets typically. So all those processes, right, the winds across the Atlantic are also what brings us the hurricanes during hurricane season down in the Gulf of Mexico or in the east coast of the United States. So all those phenomenon are related. But here again, think of the vegetation and the cloud cover. And again, the water cycle, I mean, you've probably all seen some version of this, at some point in your classes, even in, grade school or something. So you have, again, evaporation from the oceans or, evapotranspiration on Earth from the forests that pumps water as vapor in the atmosphere. Then this water eventually reaches the land, and on land, it's condensed, so condensation of the clouds generate rain. The rain falls back on Earth, and then that rain can trickle that back down basically to the ocean, either through the rivers or through the groundwater, right? So some of that rain will infiltrate the soil, become groundwater for more or less time. We'll see. We'll talk about this, and then eventually, right, seep back out into the drainage, so the river networks, or directly into the ocean, and the cycle completes. Now numbers, so this is an illustration that I particularly like. I believe this is a USGS illustration, and here are the numbers, right? So one thing that I like about this illustration, and again, that 60-40 rule that I mentioned here is really what you want to remember of this. And when we do the lecture on the watershed water balance, you'll see that this rule is pretty pervasive, across. So again, remember that 60-40 rule. So if you look at the 100 precipitation on land here on the top left, So if we have 100, let's say this is in cubic kilometers per year, but just take 100, right, falls on Earth, you'll see that about 40 discharges to the ocean and about 60 re-evaporates back to the atmosphere. So that's the 60-40 rule, right? So maybe that's not so intuitive. Like if you think of rain, if I ask you how much of a rain event, eventually reaches the ocean versus is evaporated, maybe you would say, well, most of it goes back to the river and the oceans, and some of it, a little bit of it, goes to the atmosphere. Again, remember that picture from Africa, that is not the case. The 60-40 rule means there's more water coming back to the atmosphere as evapotranspiration than there is as runoff. And then, of course, there's a lot of water that cycles directly on the ocean. So if you have a lot of heat on the ocean, that's kind of the hurricane story again. There's a lot of heat, a lot of evaporation on the ocean, but most of the water that is evaporated from the ocean goes back to the ocean. So these numbers these numbers you can sort of ignore. Really, what's interesting is what is transferred, to the Earth. Okay, so again, remember the main point here on the water cycle is the importance of vegetation to evaporate or transpire water back to the atmosphere as vapor. And again, that 60-40 rule, that means that most water that falls as rain actually returns to the atmosphere as evapotranspiration. Okay, thank you. I'll see you in the next video.